Welcome, everyone. Hello. Do I even need this? So thank you all for driving your Corvettes here today. I'm thrilled to be with you. For those of you on the live stream, there's a Corvette show on the street, and that's all the parking was very difficult. Thank you for braving the traffic. We appreciate you. If you haven't seen me do this before, my name is Jessie Rack. I'm the program director here at the Natural History Institute. Before I introduce the speaker, I want to make a couple of quick announcements and some plugs for some upcoming programs. The restrooms and water fountains are around that wall just on the other side, so just go that way and keep turning right until you can't anymore, and that's where they are. Also, a quick reminder that we're a 501c nonprofit, so we exist because of your support. And we always appreciate anything you can do to help us keep the lights on. Or if you're interested in non-monetary support, we love volunteers. So we always need volunteers to help at events, to help at do basically whatever your interest or skill set is. We can probably find a way to use you. So let me know after the talk if you're interested in volunteering or interested in signing up for one of our fun upcoming events. So a couple of things you might be interested in. If you see Dr. Ann Woolery's talk tonight and are like, oh my gosh, I want to try this for myself, you're in luck because space is still available in her workshop this Saturday. I know some of you are already signed up for it, which is great. So this Saturday from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., we have a workshop that's called Become a Citizen Artist. So after you learn all about this art-based perceptual ecology methods and how you can use basically art methods to learn about nature, then you can go try them in the field. And it's basically you meet here at NHI, I'll drive you in a van to a couple spots, and then Leanne will lead the workshop, and it'll be wonderful. I have all the materials. If you're interested in signing up for that tonight after the talk, come see me. It's $65. Also, next weekend, we have plein air painting in the San Francisco Peaks. So we have special permission to be at Hart Prairie Preserve up in the San Francisco Peaks. And it'll be painting. Hopefully there's fall colors. It's going to be beautiful. And so that's $75. Meet here. I'll drive you in a van. It's easy for you. And then I'll bring you back by 6 p.m. for that one. And finally, one more, a speaker series. So, oh wait, no, I'm sorry, I have one more that I didn't write down. Another upcoming free events we have on October 6th, so that's a Thursday, we're hosting a book launch for Rebecca Davis and Roger Assay, who some of you may know. They're local sculptors. And they're releasing this book, which I have a pre-print copy of, which you're welcome to take a sneaky peek at after the talk. It'll be on that table. So they're having a special free book launch event right here at 7 p.m. on the 6th. They'll be showing a short video of their process. They'll be giving a short talk and then doing a book signing, and you can purchase books here too. And if you're interested more in the science side of things, because we do all kinds of things here at NHI, we have a free talk on Thursday, October 13th. It's Arizona Game and Fish's snail guy, Jeff Sorensen. He's giving a talk which is delightfully titled, Get to Know Your Slimy Neighbors, Desert Snails in Arizona. So he's a blast, so I recommend you check that one out. So now with that, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Ann Woolery. Dr. Woolery is the founder and research director at Citizen Artist, a participatory science research platform where they use alternative research methods to study ecological systems change and address environmental issues. You're going to hear all about that tonight. So Leanne is an interdisciplinary researcher, educator, scholar, and a practicing artist for over 30 years. And she pioneered this art-based perceptual ecology, which you're going to hear about. She holds a PhD in environmental studies from Antioch University, New England. I was going to say, if you're not familiar with that, it's like the Prescott College of the East, right? Am I right? Yeah. So, sorry, Antioch. No,
That's true.
Right, it is. And a master's degree from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Her field study in desert ecology was conducted in the Sonoran Desert, and findings that support other ways of knowing, can be read about in her dissertation, Art-Based Perceptual Ecology as a Way of Knowing the Language of Place. So Dr. Woolery currently teaches art-based research methodologies via online courses. She's also taught in the PhD in Sustainability Education program at Prescott College, and the University of Washington's graduate program on Education, Environment, and Community at Islandwood, Bainbridge Island, Washington. And Dr. Woolery asked that you all please hold your questions till the end of the talk. So I'll give you the signal, and then we'll start with the questions. So with all of that, I present Dr. Ann Woolery presenting Citizen Artists, an Alternative Path to Studying Environmental Issues. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very nice. Is that me making the noise coming out of the speaker? Okay. Hi, hello. Thank you for being here. It's really wonderful to see so many people on a Thursday evening. I appreciate that you came out. This is probably one of the first times in the last 2.5 years that I've had an in-person audience as I talk, so it's really exciting to actually see people and you're not in a screen. Like all the other folks I've been talking to here for the last couple of years. Probably like you as well. So, yes, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the work I've been doing for the past 25 plus years, but I'll condense it so we don't have to go over 25 years. And then I really would like to share some examples with you of the work that I'm doing now and give you an idea of how I work in, it could be called anything from interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, but the idea of bringing multiple different disciplines together. So I grew up in the Midwest and along the Missouri River, actually along a creek that had no name that we called No Name Creek because it flowed straight out of a spring and right into the next river and eventually got to the Missouri River. But these images are just giving you an example of some of the work I started doing in my graduate program and then on into my doctoral research when I was looking at how art making can be a process for connecting more closely to the nature or the natural environment. And I went back to my original home where I had grown up and found ways to connect with nature through my art making. I had very few early influences in regard to local or regional folks, and that was just primarily, it was in a time when mentors for young women was not prevalent, but there was one artist that I was familiar with and received one of his books at one time, Charles Schultz, who was an artist and a scientist. So that was one of my first live people that I got to see and know more about. But from that, you know, how I got from that early influence up to where I am, I was very challenged with math and the language of math and numbers. I was very good at visual language, and so that's the path that I took as a young person. I went on to study graphic design and then moved into the broader field of art therapy, thinking that as I support and believe in nature being a very healing process, was wanting to connect those groups of a therapeutic process with nature and the visual arts. I learned pretty quickly that was not the path for me, that I really had wanted to be in the sciences from the beginning, be in natural history, be outside, be learning about ecology and biology. So decided to make that jump and go for a PhD in the sciences. And my degree's in environmental studies with a strong focus on ecology and desert ecology. In that time frame, I've spent time in many different habitats, which you'll see some examples of my work showing these different habitats. The Pacific Northwest was a great learning area for me, where I was hired to be the director of a brand new environmental center and had the integration of art, science, and technology in our program. both a master's program and also a program for 4th and 5th graders and also for teachers. And they came out to our campus. That beautiful picture down in your left corner was the round straw bale art studio that I got to work out of in Red Cedar Forest there. But with that, I did end up in the Sonoran Desert twice. This is my second time of being here. And I do love the area, and a lot of my work and what you'll see tonight is focused on that. But early on in my master's program, before I had a full understanding of what art-based research methods meant as far as a research methodology, I started with some of my own work and just trying to inquisitive, curious mind, and wanted to know why do things work, which is a kind of a basis for probably everybody in this room, of if this is an interest of yours, as to why do we think about things and how do we understand them better. So this particular example was one that a research study, in a sense, that I set up in my home in Chicago, where I looked out my kitchen window at a brick wall. I was in an old vintage apartment, and that was pretty typical at the time for Chicago living. It probably still is. But my curiosity was, what's in my tap water that I'm drinking and feeding to my dogs here? You know, is it something I should be drinking? So I thought, well, one way I could discover and see what could grow in tap water was to start growing Kentucky ryegrass. So I did that in these jars, made it a very measured and created standards to it, where every day I would wash the seeds. There was no water left in the jar other than what I could not get out. But I left them on the windowsill where the light was reflecting off that brick wall to see, you know, would it grow? And it did. And I documented it in the way I knew how, through my different writing and photography and drawing over time, to learn and see what I might learn, basically, of could I understand how this was capable of growing in just tap water from Chicago. I can't say that my findings were anything really profound. It was more the process that really intrigued me, that methodical process of, you know, sowing seeds, washing it every day, putting the top back on just so. But it was an interesting process. The next one that I worked on, and I'm still involved in this research project, and it has become much more of a research project. I was working with a group of inner city youth in Chicago for a company called the Peach Club, which was an acronym for Patience, Art, Leadership. I forget what all of it was involved now, but basically we were working with kids to develop leadership qualities in them and skills through the art making process, with mentors who were from the arts within the Chicago region we were working in. And we were partnered with the Friends of the Chicago River. And again, my interest, water, was what is this water that we're using here in Chicago? This doesn't look like something that we should be drinking from, probably. But I wanted the kids to be able to experience what this might mean for them. What is the outcome of when we engage as humans in this process of curiosity and investigation of our water system? What might be the outcome of that? So for me, as an artist, I wanted to find some kind of language that would communicate to others what I was studying, this idea of we all have the right to clean water. So I developed this infant dress and created a template from it. They're all hand sewn, and they literally are, you know, small little infant-sized dresses. And what I found as I worked with this design over time was that it seemed to really pull on heartstrings for some people. That when they touched them in particular and realized the size of a human being was the size of this dress, they immediately could come to an understanding intuitively in some way that, yes, water, infants, isn't that where it's supposed to begin? We're all supposed to have clean water and other rights, all rights, when we're at that stage in life. Anyway, the kids also sewed the dresses, And part of this idea was it was very ceremonial in that we took them down to the river and we dipped them in the water source. And part of that is in support of what I will talk more about later, haptic knowledge, this idea that the body movement is recording an experience and it's embodying knowledge when we're in the process of doing that. So even as we're walking, we're adding the tactile sense of the bottoms of our feet touching the ground and understanding the topography of where we're walking. That fits in with this idea of haptic knowledge as well. But some of the kids and even adults that I work with that have on this particular project, when they physically dip the dress in the water, I've had several people say to me, this feels so ancient, like there's something in my bones or my body that I'm understanding this dipping in water source. I mean, you think about it, it's still today in many places across our earth, people go out and collect the water. Many times it's women. And this project actually started as an all-women's project, a young girls and women's project, to be able to connect to that idea of people, you know, who go out and collect the water, wash the dishes, wash the clothes, bathe. You know, we weren't doing that in Chicago, but it was the idea that was behind this project. And then the other photo helps to show that we also, in most of my work, I help people think through the Western science process of these projects. So the kids were out there collecting bugs and all the different little creatures that were living in the water to test, to learn how to biologically monitor water sources to learn, is the water clean? Can I drink from this? And such. So they learned both processes, the alternative, which is what I call my work, and then the Western science as a way to better understand. And here I'm going to try to share with you a little bit now about how I got to call what I do what I call it. And I know probably everybody in this room has dealt with this at some point in your life. When you try to communicate to other people, it's challenging unless you have something to call what you do, a name, you know, to be able to say, oh, this is what I do. So that the next time they come and talk to you, they can say, well, what about, you know, your project you're working on, such as the white dress project, which actually is now called the Litmus Test Dress, because it is very much like a litmus test when we dip it. Anyway, art-based perceptual ecology is the term that I came up with, and I'll give you a background on what that means to me. But to help you, I put this little really basic graph together. So in my master's work, I started learning about art-based research methodologies, which is a very legitimate research methodology that is from the social sciences, that's where it was based and where it began in education, in the fields of the medical fields and creative art therapies, which is basically where I originally learned it from. And it's primarily a qualitative research methodology, so it's not working quantitative, it's not working with numbers, it's very much working with people and what behaviors of people and connections to their world and why they do what they do. Anyway, art-based research methods is what the term is. Very broadly used. Now it's moving more into the medical health field. So you may have seen or heard about storytelling or media arts where they're doing video storytelling in the health field is a way that art-based research methods are now coming about, and you see more of it. And it's in, you know, out of the journals at this point. It's very much in people's lives when you hear stories about someone's health condition or their story about how they got to where they are. Oftentimes, those people might be involved in an art-based research project, and that's why you get to hear the story. But for me, as I said, I moved on out of creative art therapies, realizing I really wanted to be in the sciences, and part of that had to do with I wanted to start a school for young girls that was a field-based program where we went out and learned about nature through both this combination of science and arts. So it was very multidisciplinary, and a mentorship program as well, where people who are out doing the work every day come and mentor these young girls to help them realize there's an alternate path to get to where you want to go. My whole spiel is, you know, there are different portals to get to the sciences, that we don't all have to take the same path to get there, but you can still get there. So since that was my story, I wanted to share that with other people, and therefore I started developing these art-based research methodologies that I had learned in the creative art therapies, and learn how to apply them to hard science, to Western science. So how do I study things like effects from climate change? How do I study biodiversity and sustainability practices? How do we think about, you know, larger connections about Earth and humans? And so I named this Art-Based Perceptual Ecology. The idea being the art-based, that's the foundation of the work I do. And when I say art, I'm speaking very broadly. It could be any discipline within the arts that we work in. I, as a visual artist, prefer using that language because I'm very familiar with it. But there are people doing art-based research methodology that use storytelling, that use narrative written poetry. Performance is really big, and theater in this field. Not studying Earth systems or natural sciences necessarily, but they're still working towards, you know, whatever their research goal is, they're using an art-based method. For me, again, the art-based is foundational to what I do with this work. And the idea of perceptual is this concept that our body is always here, in place, right? We're always engaged and entwined and interconnected with the natural world and others. As long as we're on this earth, James Gibson is one of my favorite writers that talks about, you know, we walk through the world with our head on our shoulders attached to our feet, walking across the earth, basically. With that idea, you don't separate from that. We're breathing air. So perceptual is a very important piece of this as well. And then the ecology is talking about how my work is framed in ecological, biological studies. It's framed within ecology, really looking at natural history, the sciences of natural sciences. So there's some strengths that have to do with the work I'm bringing to you this evening as well. And I call them multimodal protocols, which we're going to go through the different protocols, which is another word for the methods that I use when I'm out studying these different environmental issues. And some of these strengths have to do with just this idea that the protocols are all grounded in multimodal knowledge systems. So what that means is that we are looking at other ways of knowing what we're studying beyond just Western science. And some of those embodied knowledge systems, some of the knowledge systems that we're working with are embodied, is one of them. It's very huge. The idea, again, that our body takes in so much information all the time. And what I train people in is how to process that information so that we can learn from it. I mean, you're all very familiar with the fact that our body's sensory processing system is constantly working, but our conscious mind isn't necessarily always tracking what our body's doing. I mean, just breathing is a good example, to be real. How often do you think about the fact that you're breathing? You know, for those of you who meditate or do yoga or some other form of you know, mindfulness practice, you're very aware of it, I'm sure. But for others, not so much. I mean, I practice those things, but I go every day without remembering that I'm standing here breathing. But the idea that's embodied. Tacit knowing is another one that some people call that intuition. I look at it more as it's that bridge between what's explicit and what's not explicit. So what we know internally in some way, some people call it their mind's eye, some people call it other things, but that you know what you know. And that's a way of describing tacit knowledge. Haptic, I mentioned earlier, place-based has to do with knowing the place that you live in from a local ecological study. And then art is a way of knowing, which we're really going to look into tonight. This idea of sensory-based learning is another big part of what I do. So all of the protocols focus on either auditory things, primarily beyond sight, I should put it that way. So how do we engage in the natural world in a way that is not just through our eyesight? And this is just another quick graph of maybe helping to explain some of how all these come together to form art-based perceptual ecology. So engaged in these methods, the idea is that one will see the world a bit different. You come at questions differently. It puts you in a state of mind that you might not be in when you're just out strolling in nature, or that when you are working within Western science methods. And I want to say too that one of the things that I share with folks, I frame my work again in a research paradigm, because I love research and I love studying and finding answers and being curious. But this work also applies to people who are interested in finding a deeper connection to nature in some way. You know, for someone particularly that's moved into a new area, or someone that's been there for a long time and wants to find a new way to understand the place that they live in. These protocols also are very applicable to that study. So they don't just have to fit into a research paradigm. This helps to give a little bit more idea about what is the research framework of it, however. And that is that the art is always made in response to a research question. So when I'm out in the field, engaged in art-based perceptual ecology, I always start with a research question: what do I want to learn? And actually write it down, have it in my head. The other piece that's unique to this methodology is that we look at the researcher, the person who's doing the study, as the instrument. And what I mean by that is, again, focused on this idea that you are a sensory-based instrument. You know, you're highly tuned as a human being. So learning what that sensory data is sharing with you is what the art making provides. The art that we create and collect, is the terminology I use when I'm in the field doing the research, is the actual data. And that's mostly what you're going to see here in just a minute. And again, I mentioned there are all kinds of alternative forms to this art-based research method that could be used beyond visual mark making. And I'm sure there are many folks we could come up with in addition to Maria here, but some of you may know her work already. There are many local people up in your herbarium, I believe, that you've shared with me that use visual language, that use drawing or painting as a way to express that relationship that they have with nature, and also as a way to communicate what their findings are about plants in particular here. So as Jesse mentioned Citizen Artist. That is my business platform that I use. And for me, a couple years ago, it came to be that I wanted to be able to share my work more broadly. So it seemed like a good next step of being able to do that. I do what's called participatory research. For some folks, they call it community-based research, or citizen science, or community science research. So one good example would be butterflies. There's many monarch butterfly studies that someone who has not gone through formal training in science has the opportunity to be part of, and some of you may do that already, be involved in community science projects. I'm sure NHI has some that would share with you and have you volunteer for. But the idea is that is the work. Next step for me is being able to bring more people to this art-based perceptual ecology work. We go within a community. The community makes the decision about what's to be studied. So as an example, if we're studying river systems, the idea is to make sure that the community is the one that makes that decision. The river is what we need to study. Its cleanliness. Is it the water available for drinking? And we put together a research project and then get folks outside and involved in just the study and the collecting of data and coming to findings on that. Our goals are pretty simple at Citizen Artists. We want people outside, and we want people connected to place and to learn about it, to understand it, to find love for it, and hopefully with that more protection and sustainable practices can come about. This next section I'm going to go through pretty quickly, but to let you know, one of the other unique elements within our work at Citizen Artists is that we really approach our field-based research from a multi-species perspective. And what that means to us is that we honor and respect all species on the earth. And what it also means is intrinsic way of thinking about nature. So this idea that we're all connected and collected together, we focus on that. Whereas some research in the field is done where you have a specific goal. You go out, you measure something, you catalog something, you come back, you run your data numbers and determine what the outcome is without possibly thinking about whose home did I just visit. When I went out and sat in that field, who else lives there before me? Not only human, but what I call sentient beings, all living beings that are there as well, your bird life, your plant life. Oops. And so we do this by shifting perspective is what basically I call it. Getting people to physically make a movement can alter how we look at the world. Doing physical exercises such as rather than being at this level where your eyes are, if you have eyesight and you're looking at your field, instead walk the field with your eyes and your feet and think about how different that perspective might be and what new questions might come to you because of that. So in shifting perspective, it's both a physical perspective change, but also can change our thinking about what we're addressing and also can change our behaviors and potentially actions and outcomes. And that's part of the ethics that guides our work there. And Citizen Artists is from that focus. Some of the ways that we do that, again, is just this idea of honoring and being respectful, thinking about a kin-centric world, and to really, in a sense, ask permission before you walk into a field with the framework that, yes, this is someone else's home, and I'm a visitor at the moment. And now I want to get into actually showing you some of the work that hopefully can connect a little bit of this, what I've been describing, from more a theory base to an applied base behind the art-based perceptual ecology. And what I decided to do tonight is just to share with you one of the protocols I've developed, but to show you how it can be applied to many different purposes and different focus on a research project. So I started out with this idea of a place-based graphic facsimile. And the idea behind that, you think about, it came up with just the word facsimile. So you go to a fax machine, you put your paper in, it sends it over to someone else, right? They get an exact duplicate mirror copy of whatever you put into that machine. And just that word always fascinated me, that, wow, can't we do that with our bodies? I think that's transporting, right? Or something along that nature. But as I thought about it, when I'm out in the field sitting studying, say, a plant, we'll just use that as the example, how could I know that plant better if I facilitated that experience like a fax machine? And where this actually came from was in my art therapy program, as I was studying in grad school, was that was one of the techniques they taught us when we were working with a client. They did not call it facsimile or fax, but the idea was that you would sit across the table from your clients, the client that would be there in a therapy session with you. You have materials, art materials in front of you, identical to what the other person has. And my job as a therapist would be to repeat, mirror, emulate everything that client did. So both body movement, using the same materials, try to mirror and repeat whatever imagery they were making on their paper if we were both, she was or he were there drawing in the therapy session as an art therapist. And the idea was I would mirror all of that. But what really inspired me was this idea of gesture mirroring. So I move my body in sync with this person across from me. It gives me information about that person, not the whole information. You know, I can't go deep into this person's psyche by doing that, but I do get a knowledge, more information about that person just by the way they hold their body, or how they hold their pen when they're making the mark, or the amount of pressure that they might put on the page. You know, all of those tell us something. It's information. And so as I started thinking about how I could take what I learned in my art therapy program and apply it to the natural sciences, I came up with this idea of a facsimile. And the facsimile being of nature, whatever I was studying in my research at that moment. Here's another example, and this was one of the first ones that I did when I started putting this into practice, was really looking at what the ecological productivity of litter fall was at this particular site where I went to often down in Patagonia, Arizona. Some of you might have been there, but similar ecosystem to what you have here to some degree in that it's riparian, large. We have Fremont cottonwoods there along the creek, but floodwaters, you know, you get all of this debris, and I wanted to understand something about the biodiversity of that location, and also, again, to be able to look at litter fall. So the idea being for an ecologist to go out and collect the leaf litter that's fallen off the trees in a particular land site, gives us information about how productive those trees are, what kind of biodiversity is happening in that particular riparian system. So my desire was to sit there, which I did for 3 hours, and drew this image, which was sharing with me through a sensory exploration. So I could smell all the mold, you know, that had built up over time, in a sense. I could examine in great detail and then tried to draw it of how this buildup happened, which gave me information about the speed, the velocity of the water as it was coming down the creek. You know, this is a stand still in the moment kind of phenomena happening here, but I was drawing as well and using my imagination to help me think through, you know, again, what was the velocity of this water system at high flood to be able to get to that information. Here's another one I'm going to share with you. This is a study I'm still currently involved in the Saguaro National Park area and around that area, of looking at the relationship between the saguaro cactus and nurse plants. So you may be familiar with this idea that often a saguaro cactus starts, well, they all start as a seed, sorry. But often it finds refuge under a nurse plant, which is often a legume tree such as Palo Verde or a mesquite tree or an ironwood tree. And trying to point out here what our columnar cactus and our different legume trees, I have trouble with that word, sorry, look like. But I wanted to study what is that relationship. There's a lot of study that happens among scientists at Saguaro National Park and across, the earth. People love to come to this region of the Sonoran Desert because that's the only place the saguaro cactus grows, and to study that relationship between plant and saguaro. So I wanted to study that further using my art-based research methods, and I was just basically looking at what the role the nurse plant plays in really structuring this community of saguaro cactus. And with that, I did 2 different protocols, so I'm showing you a second one here. But this is using what I call the acoustic ecology, excuse me, mapping. So we go out and we study sound, which we're going to do on Saturday. To study what the sound of the place is, the acoustic ecology of that place. It gives us so much information about, again, the biodiversity and the health and structures of that particular system. And I do this, again, through a visual map-making process and being able to really listen without thinking about what's making the sound, but only listening to the sound itself. So are some of you musicians in the group? Anyone? No? I see some people hesitating, not putting their hand up. There we go. So when we learn music, I mean, I shouldn't say we, I'm not a musician. When you learn music, you're listening to sound as part of what you're doing, right? But when we walk through our daily lives, how does sound affect us? It's often not in a pleasant way. Sometimes, particularly if you live in an urban area, it's invasive of your personal space. I know mine is, very much so. But there are studies in all different areas, regions, rural, local, urban, that study the ecology of place to give us a better understanding of who lives there. So that was one way I was trying to understand this relationship between the saguaro and the nurse plants. This is another example of, I've moved into really recording one small recording in the field of my data, which is the drawing on the left. And then I take it into my studio and I do what's called amplifying the data. So I enlarge it and I put more effort and focus on it. And in the whole time you're doing that, anyone's doing that, and that's part of the beauty to me of art making with one's hands, is there's so much happening neurologically where we're learning and gaining information when we're in that movement of our hands building, making. For some of you, I bet there are a lot of people in this room that are artists and call themselves artists, and others who may not call yourself an artist, but you're a creative human being, that you know what that is, to be in that space of flow, the idea where everything just works. And you're not necessarily in this moment, you're in some other space, mentally, physically, that's been written about, which I won't butcher the gentleman's name that wrote about it. His first name's Haley. If anyone wants to look it up, the book called Flow. He writes a lot about creativity and this concept of runners have it also, flow, musicians have it. Anyway, I've been studying several different saguaro cactus nurse plant relationships, befriending these folks and studying them at different times of the year, being very purposeful, and when I go out and again engage in a full sensory experience of that place, do the drawings, come inside. These drawings are about 32 inches by 40 inches, so they're good size by the time I finish with them. And in that process, I come to really know that place at a much deeper level, which is the intention. Just showing you some examples of different locations and different relationships. I have several people that have been working with me on some of these projects as well, and I'm getting ready to do some training with this Saguaro National Park's education team here in another month, so we'll get to do more of these. I'm going to jump to a different habitat right now, and just again, we're using the same graphic facsimile protocol in these, changing some of the media, so using some watercolor, sometimes color pencil, but again, focusing on place. Often in these experiences, I'm there for 3 hours, sometimes longer, trying to take in the place from a full experience sensorially and be able to translate that to this visual language. I often take photographs just to document my work so that I have that as a backup. I have one example I'm going to share with you where I have used photography as the data collection, but I actually try to stay away from that just because to me that's putting technology between me and that experience. I have people say, well, your pencil is technology, which is absolutely true, it is. And back when, it was more technology than it is today, but still, the camera seems to put something between me and my experience. This is one more example I want to share with you. This is one that I've been working with in relationship to the Sonoran Institute, which again is an organization in Arizona. They're based out of Tucson, but they work within the Colorado River region, looking at water and really focusing on clean water and the idea of keeping our rivers clean. So this was, again, it's a multimodal research project, and what that means is that I'm using 2 different methodologies. So the Sonoran Institute's methodology is, as it's written here, you mark out a 10 meter by 10 meter section on the river, you collect the trash, write it, log it in your book, every single piece of trash, and then you bag it and move on to the next section. And they're doing this in all up and down the Santa Cruz River right now, which is where this actual research project that I'm participating in is taking place. It's a small area called Nogales Wash, right outside of Nogales, Arizona, and it's just has a terrible history of collecting trash here, which I can show you, at high water levels. So you've probably seen something like this in other rivers. I hope not, but it's most likely that you have over your lifetime. And so part of what the Sonoran Institute is trying to do is through these community science or citizen science projects is getting people in their location at their river to help clean up the trash. And also what they're doing is through this logging of the data of each of these pieces of trash, they have bagged it, weighed it, so that they have a calculation now that once we bag it and weigh it, they can know what was in that trash bag, most likely. For me, I like to be able to collect it in a little different way. So again, doing the drawing was part of what I was doing. And then before bagging it, we lay it all out on a plastic sheet and sit down and draw the individual pieces. As you can imagine, with that much trash, it became very burdensome to do that. So that's where the photography came in. But still doing it in a way that, for me, brings in that art-based method that I have a particular quality that I want to communicate through this process of how I'm looking at this as data, rather than writing it down as, deflated soccer ball on a data sheet. It adds another step for me that to me brings a deeper understanding of what I'm trying to do, which is communicate to a community that we need to find better ways to deal with our trash. And that when the Nogales Wash floods, which is often because it is the Santa Cruz River, which you're probably all familiar in some aspect of our rivers in Arizona, that it starts in Arizona, flows south through Mexico, and comes back into Arizona again. It's a pretty amazing river. But with that, yeah, we are trying to get people's attention and have folks help us to really understand how we can stop putting our trash in the rivers. So the toolkit that I'm suggesting that I have is, again, multiple different protocols to study many different things, everything from biodiversity inventories to this idea of acoustic ecology. We do forest canopy mapping as well in a similar process. This is an example one of my students put together of she lives in Wales, and she has applied all of these different protocols to the various locations and habitats that she lives in, and really addressing some of these different issues. So that's pretty much the end. I really want to say that, again, these protocols, I apply them to research because that's what I love to do. They're very applicable as an exercise to use when you go out in nature and enjoying yourself. One added layer that might bring you a deeper understanding of where you live. Another way to connect with place. I know many of these protocols have great application for little people. And that's where I actually started working with them, is working with youth and being able to get them out and help them to really understand. Wow, that didn't show up for some reason. Sorry. Understand something more about this beautiful earth that we live on. So I'm done. Thank you for your patience. I do have a card over here that has my website information on it if you would like. I'm not sure why my contact information didn't come up there, but it's not on the slide. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Leanne. We have time for a few questions. And Leanne, for you, if you don't mind repeating the question so the mic picks it up for the people live streaming.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And folks on the live stream, you're welcome to ask questions also, and I will repeat them.
Yes.
Well, just with regards to that wash, how did you find out specifically about that area and target that? Like, there are so many places, it's overwhelming. But how did you find out about that being an issue?
That's a fair question. So how did I figure out Nogales wash was an issue that needed to be addressed? I live within 40 minutes of the wash. I live down in southeast Arizona. And I was introduced to Nogales by a friend 25 years ago, and I've always really liked the water where the Santa Cruz runs up out of Mexico. And that wash I knew was an issue, and I go visit it regularly, which is, part of how research often happens. It's something that's close to you or something that is of interest. I didn't know about Sonoran Institute's trash assessment program at the time, but when I saw the state of the wash back last winter when I went to look at it, I was so upset with it that I started finding, who was doing research and cleanup and trash assessment. And there are a lot of organizations that do cleanup, everywhere. You guys might have one as well. They're a good way to get started, and if these protocols are of interest to you, it's another way to, find a path to how can we help clean up trash and find new ways to deal with our trash is the idea for me, which the Sonoran Institute is doing a great job of really looking at different technology as to how we can keep that particular river clean as well as others. Yeah.
So locally, if you're interested, Watson Woods and Prescott Creeks do an annual cleanup, maybe biannual. I know they do a big cleanup. So if you're interested, you can get on their mailing list and be informed when that happens.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Other questions?
About the Saturday event and where you would go and whether then it involves trash.
So the question was, what about the Saturday event? What does it involve? No trash on Saturday. We have 2 local locations, so we're going to start at Granite Basin. So it's going to be nice if you're local. It'll be a nice and familiar area, and maybe seeing it in a new way. So we'll do some Granite Basin along the Mitt-Wash Trail, and then we're going to go over to Thumb Butte and kind of head off trail along that trail number, I forget what number, across from Thumb Butte, the other way, the way the people don't go. And I don't know if you want to speak to what we'll be doing.
Yeah. So what we'll do on Saturday, I have 2 different protocols I'm going to share with you and lead you through the details of how we would do that actually out there locally once we're out there. I'm also going to lead you through some sensory awareness exercises. So I call them, actually this summer started calling them the black belt of sensory awareness, just trying to figure out, how do we get people to recognize it? I mean, we're incredible human bodies that we have that are so attuned to the world around us, but again, our brains don't always catch up consciously with what's going on. So these exercises lead you through different ways of trying to be more aware and conscious of what's happening around you sensorially. And then we work with some of these ideas of how to visualize that. So I use the term mark making often as a way, rather than saying drawing, because to take these workshops, there's absolutely no need to have an art background or to have art experience at all. We're not going to be artists out there, even though the headline said that. But it's sort of not what we're doing. We're working with the creativity that you already have as the person that you are. And I'm going to share with you some examples of how you can heighten that to have a deeper relationship with a local place and to have another understanding and another perspective on place. I mean, that's one of the things that so many times I get from students is, I've walked by this place and studied it, all my life, and this is the first time I've really seen it. It's a way of opening ourselves to experience things differently. That's what I hope for the outcome.
The Relito River, and a bunch of washes come into it, and the only time that the river runs is when the monsoons hit and the water comes out from the mountains. The river went dry when the Europeans came over. And so they clean up those washes, they clean up the river every couple of months, and I'm telling you, a few weeks later, it is filled with trash again. Don't you think it's a problem, the way we package stuff, society? Packaging.
So the question is packaging part of the problem with why we have so much trash in our rivers, which, yes, I would say that's one of the problems. I think that it's multi-layered, though. There's behavioral issues that have to do with it.
They clean it up, and I'm telling you, 3 weeks later, it is filled with trash again.
I've seen that happen too. Again, I'm in support of what the Sonoran Institute and other organizations like them are doing that are really looking at how an additional way of dealing with the trash, in addition to changing our plastics and behaviors, is to use mechanics as a way of moving the trash out of the actual waterway, which is part of what their focus is the water. We want the water running through our rivers, but how to divert the trash so that the water can continue running.
And I think it's overpopulation.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of reasons.
Yeah, a lot of reasons, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
I noticed most of what the drawings had to do with plants. And so I'm wondering, do you also study animals and how, or insects and how they impact, or the landscape impacts them? I mean, is that part of the studies as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, do I study organisms beyond plants and look at the interconnection, animals in particular, you're asking? You know, I hadn't thought of this, but it's a pretty basic reason why I don't, is I can't draw animals, and tried to as a young person, and I never really thought about that before. I'm sure I could try that. My interest, yes, so I do look at interconnectedness and this idea of, I think we had talked, Jesse and I talked when we were scouting places about succession and this idea of how landscapes change and what the reasons are that they do change when they're changing naturally, not human, you know, invasiveness in that sense. But so that interconnection between how all organisms, plants work together is something that I'm very interested in. But yes, a lot of what I do show is plant biodiversity studies because I do quite a few of them. I'm fascinated with plants, probably would have been a botanist if I'd chosen a different path. The other thing that I really like to point out in the workshops is this idea of phenomenon and looking at what causes these different elements. As an example, one of the protocols I do is called the shadow drawing, and it's a way of looking at plants, but looking at plants differently. So rather than just studying the plant, which if anyone went through, you know, botany or ecology, you look at, you know, the leaves and the edges, and you catalog them in that way based off of those categorizations, which is a good way of doing it. But again, trying to get people to consider it differently, I have us draw shadows and study and learn the plant in that way. But with that, we're also looking then at what's happening between the plant and the soil, because our paper's down on the ground where we're tracing a shadow across the paper. And it's a way for me to teach many things. One of, you know, how fast are flying on the earth, you know, in the universe, but also this idea of fluid dynamics. So gas, air that's happening between these two spaces, I get people to start focusing on that phenomena. What other phenomena can you think of, you know, that we don't necessarily see, but that's happening around us all the time? And so fluid dynamics is, to me, is a fascinating study of how movement in air, as an example, to try to make it more concrete. Thinking, you've probably seen whether it's vultures or crows or other birds, but that are doing their flight. You know, they're actually tracing dust in the air. I mean, that's the pattern that's happening. So do we think about that, or do we look at, you know, air and think of the dust and the patterns dust is making, and what would we learn, and therefore where would our mind go to yet another section of thought if we did study fluid dynamics and air? Air that passes over our jet wings as we're flying, you know, to travel across the country in our different jets. That's fluid dynamics. People study that all their lives sometimes, but I try to get people to think more, you know, local, immediate, right in front of us. So that was a long answer to your question. Did I answer your question?
Even thinking sometimes of when I go out of looking at scat and just seeing, you know, what animals have been crossing certain washes or where they hang out, and it's just you know, it's something that most people probably wouldn't look at, but it tells you a lot of information about
Yes,
what's been
exactly.
there.
Tracking. So yeah, that's an incredible skill. I'm so enamored with people that are able to do that, and so to track scat, yes, I agree. I mean, you get so much information from that, and you have to be very keenly aware. You have skills that myself wouldn't have because I don't always see the scat, but yeah, the weight of the animal, what they ate, all those details.
So we have one more question, and it comes from the live chat. So Catherine Baldwin would like to know, can you talk about your process of developing research questions that can be addressed through this method?
Oh, gosh.
And then I believe Leanne will be available afterward if you want to chat with her also. So,
What is my process for developing
sorry,
research
what's your
questions?
process of developing research questions that can be addressed through these methods?
Yeah, no, that's a very fair question. Sounds like somebody that's doing research. Yes, come take my class online, and we address that for a whole class. So seriously, though, how do I do that? Oftentimes, my research, as I mentioned earlier, starts with something I'm passionate about and that I really care about. You know, I'm on this end of the life continuum, so I don't have a whole lot of time to just play around with other people's ideas. I want to focus on what I care about. And, you know, water, plants, health of our planet, you know, being able to leave a sustainable place behind, all those things matter to me. So research questions, I usually develop quickly, just to start with, to get something on paper so that I think about, okay, I'm working in this process, I'm studying and curious about this particular idea, which it usually starts as, what am I most curious about? And then leads from there. I often rewrite my research question multiple times, and I encourage the doctoral students I'm working with right now to keep doing the same thing, because your process changes as you're gaining new information, and you know, it's okay in the way I work to change that research question, because your findings are going to give you new information, and you want to be flexible and be able to keep working with that. And I hope that answered her question.
That sounds, as a pure scientist, that sounds exactly like what we do. So the more you learn, the more you refine your question. That's
Yes.
great. Yeah, so it's just another way of collecting data. It sounds like what you're saying. So
exactly.
fantastic. Well, thank you all one more time
Yes.
for being here.
Thank you very much
As
for
a
coming out
token,
tonight.
yeah, as a token of our appreciation from NHI, I would like to present Leanne with this lovely NHI hat in one of our new color schemes. We got
Thank
new
you.
colors in if you haven't had a chance to check them out.
Wow.
So thank you so much for being
Yeah,
here.
thank
We
you.
so appreciate you. The gallery is open still. If you didn't get a chance to check it out yet, feel free. Come see me if you're interested in signing up for any of our upcoming events. And I believe Leanne will be here for questions afterward. So
Yep.
thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Be careful driving your Corvettes home.